We continue right along here on the Ostrom Avenue podcast. Johnny Gadamowitz and Ethan Frank. Now we have the pleasure of being joined by Noah Hiles of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, getting us ready for the Orange and Panthers from Acrisure Stadium this weekend. Noah, what's going on?
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me on. Good to be talking with a couple of future Capital Jays. I can already tell you guys go to Syracuse. You both have your radio voices when you speak. You're doing a really good job.
You're too kind. We appreciate that. Let's hop in here and talk some Orange and Panthers. For Pitt, an interesting year to say the least. You rewind all the way back to week 1. This is a team that took Tennessee to the wire, but here we are, 8 weeks in, 4-4 overall. Obviously a bit of a letdown from last season, 3 losses in the last 4 games. What's kind of the general vibe surrounding Pat Narduzzi's squad right now in 2022?
They won't vocalize it, but you can tell there's disappointment. This was a team that, they lost the best receiver in the country to the transfer portal, and they lost the only quarterback that went in the first round last year's draft, but they returned a ton of talented players. They returned their whole offensive line. Pretty much everyone on the defense was back, and they returned one of the best a player that's now one of the best running backs in the country. And the expectations were this could be a team that competed for another ACC championship. The team itself said that it expected to be competing for a spot in the college football playoff at the beginning of this year. And as you could see, they're nowhere near that. And because of, the shortcomings in October, they're disappointed. They're frustrated, and deservedly so. They look at Syracuse as a team that, they can beat a ranked opponent and hopefully turn their season around and have, something to at least hang their hat on. Maybe if they went out, they go 8-4, and that's something to be happy about. But more than anything right now, I think the focus of the program is keeping the program at least up to the standard that they've worked hard to build it toward, to no longer just be a 7-5 team regularly. Last year, what I think was Pitt's first 9-win season under Pat Narduzzi, who's now in his 8th year here. So if they can get to 9 wins with 4 regular season wins in a bowl game, I think that maybe they'd consider this year somewhat of a success. But right now, it's tough. They're fighting for anything right now to keep motivated and keep positive, because the last 4 games, 3 of them have been really, really difficult for Panther Nation.
You look at the month of October, like you mentioned, a loss at home to Georgia Tech, then a win against Virginia Tech, and you squish a bye week in between there before 2 straight road losses to Louisville and North Carolina. The latter, a team that is now ranked and is establishing themselves as maybe the best team in the Coastal Division. But Louisville's a team Syracuse saw week 1 and put a beating on. But now this is a Louisville team that has completely turned its season around. So what did you see in those back-to-back losses for Pittsburgh?
I saw nothing in the fourth quarter. That's all you need to really look at. If you look in the last 2 fourth quarters, Pitt's been outscored 38-0 combined. Against North Carolina in the fourth quarter last week, there were 36 offensive snaps between the 2 teams. Every single one of them took place in Pitt territory, meaning, North Carolina had the ball 3 times, in the fourth quarter. They started in Pitt territory twice. That resulted in touchdowns. And the third time they started in Pitt territory, they ran out the clock with 5 minutes left and won the game. And it's because the offense has been so bad in the fourth quarter, it not only prevents them from scoring points, it allows the opposition to score as well. They turn the ball over late in the game, and that results in easy points from Louisville and North Carolina. A Bannicanda's fumble allowed North Carolina to take the lead, or to build upon its lead, But then even you go back to the Louisville game, like I said, they turned the ball over a lot in that game too. And while Louisville didn't get any points off of turnovers, it's just the field position battle shifts, and it makes things easier on Louisville's offense, and it makes things a lot more difficult on Pitt's defense, who gets a 3 and out, and all of a sudden it's right back out on the field, and it has unfavorable field position, and it basically feels like there's nothing it can do to get a win. And that's what's really been the difference maker here, is late in the game when Pitt needs to throw the football, when they can't run play action, when they know they can't rely on their midseason All-American running back, when they actually need to go 5 wide and get a first down through the air, they haven't been able to do that. And as a result, it's produced 2 fourth quarter collapses in the last 2 weeks. to teams I don't know if they should have beat North Carolina, but they definitely should have beat Louisville. They were winning and entering the fourth quarter in both of those games. They lost by double digits in both.
I want to hit a little more on just the bizarre nature of the year that this has kind of been. And granted, I know September 10th is going back quite a while at this point in time as we enter November, but there are some people that think Tennessee might be the best team in the country. And this is a Pitt team that took them to overtime, but then as you alluded to, some really, really tough losses, only putting up 10 points against the Cardinals a few weeks ago. What do you sort of attribute this Jekyll and Hyde type nature of a team to so far?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, I mean, we could really, first things first, Pat Narduzzi's teams always seem to play well against top tier competition. Normally, like you look, they've upset during his team time here. He's beat the number 2 team in the country twice, both on the road and home, once against Miami. That was Kenny Pickett's first ever start. The other time was, of course, on the road against Clemson, snapping a big win streak that they had with Deshaun Watson and company. So that you could look at that, they're amped up, but honestly, it's really just the quarterback play. That Tennessee game, if you go back and watch it, Pitt should have won that football game. In the first half, Keaton Slovis looked like a completely different quarterback than what we've seen him in the last month. He got a concussion on the final offensive play from Pitt that half. They got the ball back with like 26 seconds. Pitt decided to try to run an actual play rather than knee out the clock and take a tie into the locker room. He gets sacked. He fumbles. He gets a concussion. He's out for the game. Tennessee then takes the lead because of that turnover. They actually hold Hendon Hooker and company, a team that just put up 50-something points against Alabama and the same against Tennessee or Kentucky. They held them to like 3 points in the entire second half. And Pitt is able to tie the game and take it into overtime with a backup quarterback who in the fourth quarter played that game on one leg. He couldn't even walk. He missed the next 5 weeks of the season from his injury from that game. But they went into overtime, and if they had a healthy Keaton Slovis who played anything remotely close to how he played in the first half, they beat Tennessee. There is no smoking cigars after Alabama and tearing down goalposts and Rocky Top if Keaton Slovis gets that concussion. But since that concussion, and I don't know if it's affected him mentally, I don't know if he's still hurt, but if you look at how he has played the game of football since he's returned from that concussion against Rhode Island, they really eased him back in. And they did not take any shots down to the field. And we asked about it, and they gave the answer, oh, they're just taking what it gives us, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. But it was kind of suspect. And we're like, well, if he needs to throw downfield later on, he doesn't have any reps in doing so since he played Tennessee a couple weeks back. And every week since then, he has regressed in play. He looked bad against Georgia Tech. He looked even worse against Virginia Tech, but they abandoned the passing game and completely. And they depended on Israel Abanikanda, who ran for 320 yards and 6 touchdowns to win that game. And then you go to Louisville, looked decent in the first half against North Carolina, but the bad play appeared up against once again in the second half against the Tar Heels. So really, it's just been his regression. If Pitt could get better quarterback play, I firmly believe they would be a 6-2 team, if not a 7-1 team. Narduzzi got made fun of for his quote he gave us last week when he said, prior to the North Carolina game, he said, I feel like we're undefeated right now. The only team that's beat us is ourselves. Probably not the best quote, especially on Twitter, where people don't handle quotes in general well. But he does kind of make a good point where if they just played mistake-free football or even just average football offensively, the defense has been good enough and the run game's been good enough for them to win pretty much every game they've been in. So it's really come down to a regression in quarterback play as to why this team, who should have took Tennessee to overtime, why that team doesn't exist anymore.
So I guess then the interesting question that I'm thinking about is, if there is no Abanikanda on this offense, where would this team be?
That's a very good question. I think your answer can be found in the Georgia Tech game. If you look, as he's only had 2 bad games, I think only 2 games where he didn't run for over 100 yards this year. The first game was against West Virginia, and he was replaced by Rodney Hammer Jr., who ran for 90 and caught for like 60. And Izzy also scored the game-tying touchdown in that game, so he made an impact. But in the only game where Pitt did not have Abanikanda or Hammond for the entire game was against Georgia Tech. And even then, they still were moving the ball decent on the ground. It's just their third string running back, Vincent Davis, fumbled the ball twice. And that kind of did them in against the Yellow Jackets. But here's a stat that'll blow your mind. Israel Abanikanda has scored the Panthers' last 10 touchdowns. The last Pitt player who scored a touchdown before him isn't even on the team anymore. It's Jaden Bradley. He's in the transfer portal. He's done. He left like 2 weeks ago. So you'd have to go back even further to find a Pitt Panther. You'd have to go. I don't know if there's been one Pitt player. No, there's been one touchdown by a Pitt Panther not named Israel Abanikanda that's taken place in ACC competition. It was Gavin Bartholomew, in the first half against Georgia Tech. That's the last time a Panther scored a touchdown in ACC play not named Israel Abanikanda. So to answer your question, Ethan, there's not a lot to the offense without number 2.
He's putting up all sorts of numbers, all sorts of records. And Noah, you've had the pleasure of seeing him at his best on numerous instances throughout this season for Pitt. Syracuse has struggled mightily against the run defense. Is there a real sense surrounding Pitt's RB1 that this could potentially be just another monster game this weekend coming up?
I think he looks at every game that way. I mean, they ran the ball well against Tennessee. That's an SEC defense. They ran the ball well against, some of the best run defenses that they've seen in the ACC, and they ran the ball well against North Carolina, who has the worst run defense in the ACC. They know they can run the football. They're very deep up front. They've lost their left tackle for the season, a 2-year captain, Carter Warren. He's out. Didn't miss a beat. Their center hasn't played in like 3 or 4 weeks. They still haven't missed a beat. Their offensive line that blocked for his record-breaking day of 320 yards against Virginia Tech had 3 guys who didn't even start at the beginning of the year, started that game. So they know they can run the football. So it doesn't matter if they're playing Syracuse. I mean, maybe if they're playing like Georgia or someone, they're probably not expecting 200 yards. But Izzy's a confident guy, and this is a confident offense where they know they're going to get theirs on the ground. It's everything else that they really are worried about or not as confident in.
Switching from the offense to the defense, Syracuse, unclear who's going to start at quarterback this week. Dino Babers made that abundantly clear on Monday. How is the Panthers defense preparing for, maybe they'll see Garrett Schrader, maybe they'll see Carlos Del Rio Wilson, who came into the second half against Notre Dame. Did Pat Narduzzi mention anything about that? What's that preparation like?
Yeah, he said on Monday, they're preparing for both. And I think that's the only way you can go about it if you're Pitt. I mean, he offered his praise on the team's new offensive coordinator, the guy who came over from Virginia, and the quarterback coach along with him. And he said you can noticeably see how the offense has changed for the better with those two coming in, and their fingerprints are all over Syracuse's offensive success. He had a lot of high praise for Schrader. But he said, look, like Del Rio Wilson's also a really good backup. They're both well coached, and they're both a part of a good system, and they're preparing for both. And yeah, that's about it. Pat doesn't like to talk about injuries for his team or against his team. So that's about all we got from him on that.
Before we take a little bit of a deeper dive onto this defense, it feels like Narduzzi has really just created sort of this model of consistency. I think I saw something, his worst year since at the helm was 5-7. And this is a team that expects, if not great results year to year, at least good results under Narduzzi. Would you say this is the first time since when? I know we talked about the vibe surrounding the program a little earlier on in the interview, but when was the last time that you can kind of reflect and remember this many question marks surrounding a Pitt team?
I think actually I just wrote on this today. The situation that Pitt finds itself in right now is almost identical to where it was 2 years ago today. In 2020, exactly on this date when we're recording, November 2nd, 2020, one of its best players, Paris Ford, left the program. He'd opted out. And it had just come after they went 0-4 in the month of October. They went 1-3 in the month of October that year. So everyone likes to talk about Pitt's last year, Kenny Pickett, ACC championship, Jordan Addison. Yeah. The year before that, they also had high expectations. I believe they started the year ranked. And if not, they were ranked. They started the year 3-0. They got into ACC play and they lost 4 in a row. And I believe 3 of those were like 1-point losses. And then their final game in October, they lost 45-3 to Notre Dame at home. and then one of their top defensive players opts out. And so like things got to an all-time low, and they're at 3-4. The pandemic's happening, their players are leaving, and this group could have quit. But a lot of the guys who are seniors now worked their way into starting roles, and they battled back to go 3-1 in the month of November, and they finished at 6-5. And while they didn't go to a bowl because COVID and everything was getting canceled anyway, they used the momentum from that to kind of to spring load themselves into a really good 2021 season. So that's kind of what I wrote about today, how, it was another bad October for Pitt. But prior to the month of October, the team did not lose back-to-back games all last season. So for them to lose back-to-back this year, it's an eye-opener, and they're reverting back to how they kind of dug themselves out of the hole they threw themselves into back in 2020 right now. So that's what they're really leaning on, is that previous experience. And the only problem is they don't have a guy under center named Kenny Pickett who can provide that leadership and some pretty good quarterback play. And they're missing some leaders as well on the defense who were there. But I do think they have good leaders, especially on the defensive side of the ball and up front. And this is a good opportunity for Pitt with Syracuse, a team that they have historically played really well, and it's at home and it's a ranked opponent. Nothing better to kind of turn things around than a win over a rival at home who's ranked.
The way I see it, it's kind of like Pat Narduzzi in October and Dino Babers in November is the unstoppable force versus the immovable object, because since 2016, when Babers, his first season at Syracuse, he's won 5 total games in the month of November as head coach at Syracuse. And it sounds like Narduzzi's had, similar woes in the month of October. Now, as the calendar shifts to November, how much of an advantage does that home field play? ACC teams having to travel to Pittsburgh to play outside when the weather starts to get colder, especially for a dome team like Syracuse. How much of an advantage is that?
I'm going to be honest with you guys. Pitt does not have much of a home field advantage. And against certain teams, like when Penn State's in town or West, and I know any Panther fans watching this are not going to be happy with me saying this, but the reality is, ever since they tore down that stadium that was on their campus, they share a field with the Steelers, Acrisure. I still call it Heinz because I'm a Pittsburgher, and that's what we do. We hold on to things too much. Anyway, I get back on.
It's like everyone here is still calling it the Carrier Dome.
Right, right. And that's what I'll call it when I'm there for basketball on December 20th. But anyway, it's just they don't have that much of an advantage because the first game of the year against West Virginia, they set the city record for the highest attended sporting event in the history of Pittsburgh. But since then, I guess they had big attendance against Tennessee too, because that was a good game, but they haven't had great attendance. They normally don't have great attendance, even against good teams last year when Pickett was having a Heisman finalist type season. They don't really sell out Acrisure that often. They will against the Notre Dames, the Penn States, the West Virginias, those rivalry games or those top tier programs that come in. But against a team like Syracuse, you're going to get maybe like 25, 30,000, 40,000 if you're lucky there. And the student section will be rowdy, but the rest of the crowd will just be, it's another Pitt game. And as far as weather goes, it's actually really nice outside right now. Like it's like 60 degrees. So I don't know if the weather is going to impact anything aside from, everyone being in kind of a nice mood because it's a beautiful fall afternoon to play football. So I don't think, playing outside at Acrisure is going to be too beneficial for either team. Honestly, I think it's just going to be a place to play a football game.
Noah, I want to circle back to that defense that we were talking a little bit about earlier. Servassier Dennis, one of the leaders, a name that if you're a fan of Syracuse football, if you follow the recruiting trail, should sound pretty familiar. Local product, played at Christian Brothers Academy, but for whatever reason, SU didn't do their due diligence and go out and get Dennis, and he is really one of the leaders of this Pittsburgh defense. What's sort of his role as far as that anchor is concerned at the linebacker spot, and what makes him such a difference maker?
I can't wait to interview Servassier Dennis when he's a head coach. I don't know if it's going to be of one of the best high school programs in the country, or if it's going to be at a Division I football program. It could even be in the NFL, but it's clear when you talk to the guy, he's going to be a coach one day. He's even said that. And it's because his mind for the game is fantastic. He's someone who is, I mean, he's a Butkus semifinalist, so it means he's one of the best linebackers in the country. He was a midseason All-American. It's not because of his size. He's not that big. He is fast. He is kind of strong, but it's really his ability to just see what's happening and make snap decisions faster than the average player is what allows for him to get to the quarterback. What allows for him to make plays in space and all of the stuff that you need from a linebacker in a defense like Pat Narduzzi. He's really the carbon cut linebacker that you could have in a defense like Pitt's. And he's athletic enough to get there, but he's smart enough to know what to anticipate to put him in a position to make a play. And ironically enough, it's the lack of knowing where he needs to be at the right time that's hurt other linebackers at times on Pitt's defense. Although I think overall Pitt's defense as a whole has played pretty well. Servassier Dennis, I said at the beginning of the year, and I still believe it now, he is the most irreplaceable player on Pitt's team on either side of the ball, where someone else could go down at any other position group and they'd find a way to get close to that level of production. If Servassier Dennis were to go down with a season-ending injury, they'd have to remodel that entire defense, in my opinion. He is that good.
Wow. High praise for Servassier Dennis. Syracuse last week was favored against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was definitely the more talented team, taking this more big picture here, Noah. This week, Pitt favored at home, coming off 2 straight losses, still favored by more than a field goal. Do you agree with that?
Look, man, there's something you'll learn in this business after you've been in it for a while, and it's you can doubt your editors, you can doubt your sources at times, you can never doubt Vegas, baby. They always know right. So I didn't think it made sense that Tennessee was a 6.5 point favorite when they came into town after both teams were 1-0 and ranked. Pitt was 17 in the country, Tennessee was 24. Thought that was a little bit much. Tennessee won the game by 7 points. So listen, there's some teams win every week, some teams lose every week. The only team in the country that goes undefeated every year is the house, and that's in Vegas. So I don't doubt any of those numbers. I just play them and I lose them most of the time too. So won't be playing the Pitt one though. Got to keep that journalistic integrity and stuff. But 3:30 kick, we get to play the West Coast a little bit. So yeah, have a little fun.
Absolutely. So now Ethan mentioned earlier the Dino Babers November struggles. How do you see this one shaping out, Noah? I mean, it's 2 teams that could really kind of use a win in the worst way. Pitt at just 4-4, Syracuse at 6-2, but coming off back-to-back losses, trying to prove that 6-0 start they had was no fluke. How do you see things going down this weekend?
I picked Pitt to lose in our paper the last 2 weeks. I actually think I will pick them to win. I don't think it'll be a pretty game by any standard. I just think that they're gonna what they've been unable to do in the last couple of weeks by playing the type of quarterback they've played is with having a mobile guy that they can't bring down to the ground. It allows for the offense to kind of get a rhythm late in the game. I don't think Syracuse will be able to do that with their quarterback play. I think the defensive line will probably get some more pressure, and I don't think Syracuse's offense will ever get into a full rhythm, especially in the second half, which will allow for Pitt to do similar stuff to what it did against Virginia Tech, which was just keep pounding the rock with number 2, keep the opposing offense off the field, and keep putting points on the board. I think it'll be something like 27-21. Like I said, I don't anticipate either quarterback throwing for over 200 yards in this one. A lot of sacks, maybe a couple turnovers, maybe a defensive touchdown for Pitt, something like that. That'll help them get to that 27 number. But yeah, it's an ugly one, but I do think the Panthers come out on top. Just again, Narduzzi has done well against Babers in their matchups. And like you guys have pointed out, I knew he was bad in November. Didn't know he was that bad. So yeah, and just I think that while both teams enter this on a 2-game skid, Pitt's far more desperate right now. They are. I mean, Syracuse, they're kind of playing with house money, if we're being honest with each other. I mean, this wasn't a team that expected to be ranked when the first college football poll came out. Playoff poll, and deserving. They deserve it. I'm not taking that away from them, but this is a team that if you would have told them at the beginning of the year, hey, you can probably win 8 or 9 games, they would have been very, very excited. And I think they will. But Pitt was a team that if you told them, hey, you're not going to win 9 games, there would have been tears shed. And now that's probably not going to happen. They're going to be playing one of their last home games with this big senior class. They're going to be coming out with some motivation. That's why I like the Panthers in this one.
Well, Pitt certainly has the track record. Pitt has won 17 of the past 20 games in the head-to-head series between the Orange and the Panthers. That's Noah Hiles of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Noah, thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
I got one last question before
what do you got?
depart here. So Syracuse last one in Pittsburgh, I believe in 2001. Were either of you two alive for that?
I was.
You'd have to check. I was born in October 2001. So what was the date?
I believe it was in November. So
then yes. So then by a few weeks, yes.
Talking to a whole bunch of geezers on this podcast. Guys, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Noah, thanks so much.
Yeah.